First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for this retreat. It's been phenomenal, and I'm just so grateful
Well,
for it.
thank you. Thank you. I'm glad it's working for you.
Yes, it really is. My question has to do with what you were talking about in terms of the dialectic of enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to share the experience that I had, which felt like it, resonant with what you said.
Mm-hmm. Good.
A few years ago, I had an illness,
Mm-hmm.
and it really made me suffer in the body.
Mm-hmm.
But that also helped me to open up to a lot of truths about my personal unconscious, I guess,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and also what felt like a collective unconscious in the sense of group unconscious, like to do with my family.
Right. Yep.
It opened up truths that I got to see things became conscious that were unconscious. And one thing that came out of it was that I discovered this great antipathy to being in form.
Mm-hmm.
And to the extent that I knew it, but it wasn't so keenly felt as it was felt during, like it was hidden, and
Yeah.
it just all came out in the open.
Yes. Yeah.
And I realized that I had been using kind of the truth of the formlessness to deny the truth of form.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And how this rejection of form was actually a big cause of the suffering in form, know.
Yeah.
And then what happened was what happened was like something I didn't quite expect, and there was this visceral no to suffering. I mean, it came out.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't logical. I mean, it makes sense logically, but what happened was like it came out from the body.
Yeah.
And it had the flavor of enough, like that, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And earlier I had gone through no a lot to the suffering. I didn't want to suffer
Sure,
the way
who
I'm
does?
suffering in the body.
Yeah.
But this was different. It wasn't a no from within the paradigm of suffering. It was a no saying enough.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when, things started kind of getting more interesting. And I got this sense of I had this sort of insight, this body, I don't know which body, but just felt like body, is here to know itself as something other than suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the insight that, and over the next few days, it kind of worded itself, and I think I remember the exact words, and what it said was, form is seeking to be a clearer expression of emptiness here.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's what felt like when you said when you talked just now about that whole thing, that's what came to mind, and I thought, that's kind of resonant in that sense.
Yeah. No, it's a great example of that very instinct.
Huh.
The same instinct that I was talking about, because we have those instincts of, especially when you're sick or you're not feeling good, there's something in the mind and even in the body that's like, gee, I'd really like to get out of here. I'd really like to not suffer. That emptiness thing I've heard about sounds really good. Can I just go to pure spirit? Yeah. And like that's true too, right? That's one of the instincts that helps us to awaken. But surprise, that from emptiness or from spirit, it's wanting to complete the journey. It's actually wanting to get embodied. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And your experience is great because it didn't come from, it didn't even come from a teaching like this. It just came directly up from your own experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it felt like there was this letting go of the need to learn from suffering and discovering the capacity of body to be joy, you know.
Yeah.
And I've been working with that as a koan. I mean, it came in different forms. One was, what is my true expression? Then, what is my true expression?
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm hearing from you is how this ties in, because it felt like it wasn't, I mean, I'm saying this, and it was, well, actually it was both. It was both personal, but it also didn't feel just strictly personal.
Yeah.
And it felt like I was almost like as part of some experiment.
We are. We are. Well, you were obviously, at least to me, you were obviously touching into the transpersonal and what are usually unconscious domains of being, and those are those deep sort of archetypal instincts that when they finally get into consciousness, then you kind of get like, oh, okay, there's this one instinct to disembody into spirit, pure emptiness, and there's this emptiness has this instinct to embody itself in form. And they're not actually at the end, they're not separate, right? But they also tie into our two fundamental fears. Like almost every human being would say, okay, yeah, I'm kind of afraid of death, right? So that's the fear of emptiness. But what also people aren't often as in touch with, some are, but not as many, is being afraid of life, which is fear of embodiment.
Yeah.
And I think one of your insights that I think was really important, Amika, that I was so glad you articulated, was your insight that this body can be here from something other than suffering. Yeah. And that you don't have to suffer to learn. Yeah. You can learn without suffering. We usually do learn through suffering, but that's only because suffering eventually gets us to let go of our resistance. But once you see that, you realize, I don't need to suffer to let go of resistance. I can just let go of resistance. Yeah. Like, why suffer? Right. And the body can have, as you say, it can have this whole other, it is part of the joy of being, the bliss part, is like the joy of embodiment.
Yeah.
Right? Of spirit experiencing itself through and as form. It's just as liberating as to be free from form.
Right. And it feels like really, really good news.
I think it's really, really great news, because we spend so much of our time, trying to get away from ourselves. Yeah. Including our bodies. It kind of completes it. It's kind of a circular thing. It kind of completes a circle, to try to get away or out of the body, and then you kind of, there's this other instinct it's whatever you call, like you called it emptiness, desiring to experience itself through form. And that's joy. Yeah, yeah. It's not only joy. there still can be challenges and difficulties, but it's like it's a joyous thing fundamentally. Yes, and it's not the way I'm experiencing it doesn't exclude it's not saying no to suffering. It's not opposed to suffering. It's kind of greater than suffering. Yes, It's including it, but in a way that transmutes it or becomes sort of loves it. It doesn't oppose it. Yes, yeah. That's fantastic. It doesn't feel oppositional. Yeah, well, you touched into, you be a transcendent, and I mean transcendent, just transcendent of what you used to be conscious of. You become conscious of a whole deeper dimension of your being. Yeah. And boom, there it is. And when you do that, of course, it's like this bigger container. Like you said, it's not opposed to suffering, but somehow it's a big enough container that it can be okay with it. Yes. Yeah. That it doesn't have to spend its life opposing suffering. Yeah. So is that along the lines of what you were talking about? Yeah, that's very much along the lines. It sure is. Yeah. And part of that, one of the things you gave expression to too was, I think it's also natural that at some point it does arise in your mind, like, what is wanting to be expressed here? What is the true expression from? Yeah. And there isn't like any one thing that's right, but it's sort of the emptiness looking for, its most embodied expression of being. And of course, that can be different from day to day or even moment to moment. But that question, I think it leads to its own kind of depth. Yes. Right? Like, just the question is much more important than any answer you could put at the end of it. The question is, a deeper engagement. Yeah, it's led to
an ongoing discovery of what I am. And I think partly through what you've been sharing, I've just been feeling free to go deeper into the paradoxical experience. Like I notice how I, the day goes and I can have this sense of emptiness, like nothing is going on.
Yeah.
And then that just morphs into activity and, thought and engagement. And I think I was trying to be, I don't know, maybe there's just a greater allowing thanks to everything I've learned in the Course. It's just taken that allowance deeper. And I'm noticing that my being can encompass so much more. Or I'm becoming conscious that it already was doing that.
That's right. Yeah, it's becoming conscious for you.
Appreciating it.
I'm so glad to hear that, and thank you for sharing that. And it's exactly kind of what I wanted. I knew that presenting a lot of the material that I was going to be presenting during this online retreat was going to be highly, highly paradoxical. And yet, I think it's important because, well, number one, the closer we get to reality, the more paradoxical it seems. And also, we've all heard plenty of spiritual teachings, and great majority of the spiritual teachings that we hear and read about, not all of them, but the overwhelming majority, are teachings to get us to let go of identification with form. And it's like, okay, that's understandable because that's what, most people are hung up on. But it can leave us with this false impression, this one-sided view of what spirituality is. As I say, we can mistake the medicine for the cure. And the teaching, even all the teachings I'm presenting, I look at as they're just medicine. They're not the real health. The real health is, well, what comes alive in you. It's the living experience of being. That's what we're after, and that can't really be put into words. But I'm glad that sort of paradoxical presentation helped you to kind of embrace, more of what your experience was, because otherwise we just miss it. We just don't include the fullness of our own experience.
Yeah, because I think we get, at least I, speaking for myself, I think you tend to have an idea of how this should progress, and I was taken by surprise by so much that I discovered to be.
Yeah,
that I allowed myself to, to see.
That's kind of what it is, allowing ourselves to see.
Yeah.
I can't put it better than that.
Thank you very, very much from the heart.
You're welcome. So much. Thanks for calling. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Oh, how fun was that? That was a great, that was just really, really fun. And again, really, really instructive. So I really don't need to say anything to clarify that. It had its own clarity.